what a wonderful day to have this.
I'll just start. Hello and welcome to the 6th Animal Cemetery Walk. This activity is sponsored by Littleton Historical Society and Museum. If you look at your brochure, you will see the list and brief description of our spirited speakers. There are several cemetery keeping items that we must adhere to. No food, drink, or smoking in the cemetery. Please use the stairs and not the bankings. If you wish to make a donation, please see Ray. The refreshments are by donation. Also, please refrain the partaking until you have completed this tour. If you kindly follow us.
I'll deal with that part. That's my part. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Say the first 15 people, let's say, want to go on the first tour?
Okay.
The first 15 people
Yeah,
to step up?
Sure. I am Eleanor Emily Hodgman Porter. Please let me know if you can't hear me. I don't speak up too loudly, so just sort of wave at me if you can't hear. I'm trying to figure out today why I have been summoned to speak with you, because this is not where I'm buried. This is my grandfather, Francis Hodgman, and he's a person that actually I never got to meet. He passed away about 4 years before I was born. I was born in 1868, a long time ago. But I have a feeling I know why I was summoned here today. I'm the author of Pollyanna, and Pollyanna, I know, is a big deal in Littleton. That there is the statue, and it's right on the lawn, right near where I was born. There was a house there, and I was born in the house just next door to that. So it's a perfect spot for that statue to be. I'm so pleased that Pollyanna is being made so much of in Littleton. And I have to say that you can always find something to be glad about in everything that happens. Don't you agree? You agree that you can always find something to be glad about? Well, let me tell you a little bit first about my grandfather, Francis. My father was also Francis, and that was his son. And Francis Sr. was a jeweler, a druggist, and he sold hats, all in the same store. And you know which store that was? It's now the music store on Main Street. And I find that very interesting that it's a music store right now, because I never thought I would be a writer. I love music. I wanted to be a singer. I sang all alone. I was asked to sing for several occasions in Littleton when I was here. I was also singing in choirs. And I went to the New England Conservatory of Music in Boston. That was going to be my world. But no, after I got married in 1892, I started to write. We didn't have any children, my husband and I, but my stories were all about children. And most of them, all of them, ended with a very glad and happy ending. This little boy here today is representing a little boy I wrote about in the book called Just David. And Just David was an orphan. And he played the violin. And I wrote a story about that. And in 1916, I was invited to come back to Littleton after I'd been living in Boston for a while. And I was asked to come and do a speech. And they all said they missed me, and I was so amazed because I'd been away from Littleton for quite a while. But I came to Remick Park, and instead of actually writing a speech, I decided I would read part of the book, Just David, to maybe get them interested in reading that book themselves. That book was published just a year before the Old Home Day that I was invited to. The Old Home Day was in 1916. So I read a little bit of the book, and do you know I was the only woman asked to speak that day out of I think there were 4 men and myself. I thought that was really quite amazing that I would be asked. And there's a picture of me and the men at Renwick Park that day, and I have that on the table for you to see. I died at age 51, and it was in 1920. And all I can remember of that is I felt a chill. And all of the people in my family actually didn't live that long. Most of them died in their 50s, but I was only 51. My husband was John Lyman Hodgman, and he actually was a banker and worked for Littleton National Bank at one point. But we met in Boston when I was down there at the conservatory. My little friend here, who's representing David from the book, has some gifts for you all today, and he's going to pass them out. They are bookmarks as a little remembrance today of Pollyanna. And I do thank you for coming. Do you have any questions today of me? I'm so happy that you came, and let's do that Pollyanna wave, shall we? Be happy, everyone, and always find the glad in everything that you do. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And would you like to have those down as they go?
Thank you. Thank you. Watch yourself. Stone.
I attended classes at Plymouth and at Keene. I taught in a one-room schoolhouse. There wasn't any running water. Had to carry in firewood to keep the children warm. And there weren't any indoor services, if you know what I mean. I'm originally from Canada. I was born in 1893. I taught school here in Littleton for 40 years. In 1962, when I retired, they named the elementary school after me. I was married to my husband, Cyril. He served in World War I. I had a son that served in World War II, and unfortunately he passed away doing so. I had a daughter that was in a company. She went for music school. What else can I tell you? My husband sadly passed away in 1989, and I followed him shortly thereafter in 1991. I wrote a book that was published in 1975. That book was called Historic Glimpses of a North Country Community. And once again, that was published in 1975. The poem that I included in the book included lines, it is as if the spirit here in Littleton has looked upon us to the hills and somehow captured their strength and beauty and their inspiration and woven it all into the common fabric of daily life and made it richer. I was a non-Rotarian recipient of the Paul Harris Award from the Littleton Rotary. My citation read, "Her intense love of Littleton, her deeply etched values of citizenship and patriotism, and her dedication to her children are what made her 40-year career as a school teacher somewhat out of the ordinary." And do you know what I had written on my blackboard every single day that I taught? Cooperation. And that still holds true today. If we all cooperate, things go much better. Any questions?
How many children do you think you taught over your long career?
Oh goodness. One year there were 80 in the classroom. In the 1950s and 60s they thought that was too many, so they dwindled it down to 45. So in 40 years you figure there was a lot of children, lots and lots. And I'm not buried here. They moved me here so that we wouldn't have to walk all over the place. But since I like to cooperate, that's where we chose to be. This was the lunchbox that I carried to school. And I'm not so sure whether this was what looks like a flask to some of you. Perhaps that's what made school so fun. Then this is on loan from the Historical Society. If you ever get a chance to go to the museum, it's wonderful. They have done a really, really nice job. This is also a school bell that was common from that time and era. And any more questions? Are you enjoying the tour? Thank you. And your tour guides will move you along.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Dan Remick, and I'd like to thank you for coming out here and visiting us today. This is my final resting place. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I was born in 1852 in Hardwick, Vermont, and I graduated from Michigan University in 1878, where I studied to be a lawyer. In 1878, after that, I practiced up in Lancaster until 1882, in which time I moved down here to Littleton, beautiful place, much better than Lancaster, to practice law with Judge Bingham, who's right over here next to me. We play cards on Thursdays. I also opened up a law practice with my brother James when I moved down here. Not such a good idea. Does anyone ever work with their brother? No? All right. In 1879, a year after I graduated from Michigan University, I married my first wife. Her name was Belle Loverin. She died. She's buried up in Colebrook right now. She died in 1885. But 1886, I married my second wife, Elizabeth Kilburn. We called her Lizzie. Her father's buried over here, and her mother's buried over here. Now, in 1890, I retired from being a lawyer to go to work for my father-in-law, Mr. Kilburn over there. I worked at his stereoscopic view company, and I have no idea what I did there. Don't even know what he did, but we had a great time. Some of the things I did while I was in the area that I was proud of. I was a member of the Board of Health. I was also a state senator and a representative. I was a fire warden. Do you remember anything else I did?
You helped the typhoid.
Right, we'll get to that in a minute. Okay. I also gave the address at the 125th anniversary of Littleton in 1895. My memory's not so great. And don't remember what I said there, so I couldn't repeat it for you, but I heard it was great. Now, one of the things I was most proud of is, well, in 1902 we had a typhoid fever epidemic outbreak here. It was blamed on the Ammonoosuc River water supply, which the local officials, it prompted them to take necessary action about it. Now, this is what this lovely young lady is here for. She's one of the first typhoid casualties in this area. She was also my neighbor, and she came to all our picnics, and watched her play with her sister all the time, and very nice lady. We talked on the way to school. So, but this is what prompted me to become one of the first water commissioners of the area. Okay, in 1903, as part of the state legislation, I passed an act authorizing the town of Littleton to purchase the Littleton Water Works, which at that point was owned by a private company. It consisted of 2 pump houses and a generating station. We also purchased 7.5 square miles of drainage area off the side of Mount Garfield, which is located in Franconia and Bethlehem. And what we did then was we built an 11-mile pipeline that came all the way over here to the Railroad Ave chlorination point there. And to this day, Littleton gets its fresh, safe water from that source. A few of the other things I also did was Lizzie and I donated a building to the hospital, right next to the hospital, which became a nursing school. I also got a $15,000 grant from the Carnegie to build a library over here. At the time of my death in 1917, I was the largest taxpayer of the area. Not largest like size-wise, but I had a real lot of money, and so I pay a lot of taxes. But most of my money came from my father-in-law there, Benjamin West Kilburn, and when he died in 1909, the money went to his wife, Caroline, my mother-in-law, and then when she died, the money went to my wife, Elizabeth Remich, and then I got it for 2 years. But then when I died, donated most of it to the Congregational Church, the library, the community center, Kilburn Craigs, and several other organizations like that. We also gave the library $5,000 to build a second floor to house the Kilburn Art Collection. Father-in-law also owned a whole bunch of land from here all the way over to Dell Park. So kind of married into that good deal. But that's the story of Daniel Remake.
If you'd like, I have a couple of seats here that I've taken up. And so if you'd like to take a load off your feet, I've spent the last 115 years taking a load off of my feet, so it feels good to be up and around. Thing is, they should never have buried me with my doctor's bag. It's filthy. Well, I'm Dr. Ralph Bugbee, Jr. Long line of doctors. My father, Ralph Bugbee, is buried on this side. I had a brother, Frank, who was a doctor in Lancaster. I had another brother who was, his name was Lafayette Bugbee. He was at, up in Derby, Vermont. And then there was me. My father had a thing about names. My youngest brother, G.W., George Washington Lafayette Bugbee. All right. And he died at the age of 8. And my other brother was named Marquis de Lafayette Bugbee. He made it to age 30. After that, my father decided, we'll go with Ralph. And went with Frank, and we lasted a lot longer. Now, as you can see, we have a massive monument here, probably one of the nicest in this cemetery. And it is a statue looking heavenly, up toward heaven. But also there was a chain at one time to the anchor. So it shows that we Bugbees look to the beyond, but we're still anchored to Mother Earth. And that's the symbolism in this statue. I was a doctor in town for 36 years. I did some doctoring in Franconia for 3 years and found that business was better in Littleton. So I came this side and worked here. Now, one of the things is I really don't want to talk too much about me personally, because a doctor who died in 1893 is like any other doctor who died in the 1890s. Interesting story, the reason why I figured I'd come back on this side, is I wanted to tell you about Doxy Wilkins. Something that a lot of people don't know. Doxy is buried up along the wall. So if you go out to the wall where you came in, go to your right, almost down the end, he is the only black person buried in this cemetery. And Doxy was born a slave in North Carolina in 1851. And during the Great Conflagration, as you call it, the Civil War, the New Hampshire military were there, and they freed Doxy. Now Doxy took up with them, and he worked for them in the camp, and he became pretty fond of the Littleton chaps. Well, the New Hampshire boys, politics never change. I don't get the news too often on the other side, but politics pretty well stays the same. And all the New Hampshire chaps were sent home on furlough as long as they voted for a certain candidate for governor. So they were all given a pass and sent back. And they did their voting and then went back. Well, Doxy took up with the Littleton fellows and came to Littleton around the age of 14. In the 1905 history, Doxy is listed as contraband. All right, stolen property. Now, Doxy, the reason why I know so much about Doxy is I had a farm up on Far Hill, and Doxy, his first job was working on my farm, and he worked for me until my demise in 1893. He then had a number of other jobs. One job was working for the town, and he crushed rock. He made gravel, but poor Doxy, he ended up getting a disease of the lungs from the dust. And at the age of 51, as a matter of fact, 2 days after he turned 51, Doxy joined me, but up at that end. Doxy was married twice. He married a girl from Vermont. Then after she passed on, he married a girl from Worcester, Massachusetts. And she had a daughter. And Doxy's funeral, now this is what I hear, because you can keep in touch if you want from beyond. And Doxy had a wonderful send-off. It was held in the Congregational Church, and believe it or not, the Episcopalians sang for him. So the choir showed up and sang for Doxy, right? And so he had a wonderful send-off. He was loved by one and all in this town. People kept on telling him, Doxy, why did you go back to your relatives? Why did you go back? He wanted nothing to do with it. This was his town. He did not want to leave Littleton. His father was still alive. He knew where his father was, knew where his mother was, stayed here, and his remains are still here with us. And I felt that that was a very important story to share with you folks about Doxy Wilkins. Doxy was also he was a fireman. If you go to the fire department, see the nice thing about being buried on this side, I can see the fire department from here. All right? And if you go into the fire department, I understand, they have some old photographs from around my time period, and there's a photograph of a black fireman, and that's Doxy. So he was civic-minded. He was a volunteer fireman. Wonderful photograph of Doxy riding one of the fire engines with the team of horses in the front. All right, posing in front of the Opera House, which actually was built a year after I died, but I know it's there. Now, another thing too about, one of the things people often wonder, like, well, how did Dr. Bugbee pass on? I had the flux. Sounds like something you'd wash your dishes with, but you really wouldn't want to. Another word for flux is diphtheria. And I'm not going to go into all the gritty, nasty, how it ends up. But it was a quick death, but it wasn't the most enjoyable thing I ever went through in my lifetime. And also the flux was, it took out my brother, it killed my brother George Washington. It killed my father. So it was rather a common disease, illness, not a disease, actually a virus, and that would kill people. Another story too. My brother Frank, Dr. Frank Bugbee, was in Lancaster, and this is an interesting story too. He's involved in a murder in Lancaster. Now he married one of the town girls. I don't know if you're familiar with the Colonel Town and that family up in Lancaster area. Well, he married one of the town girls. They had a daughter named Hattie. He married Maria. Well, on September 5th, 1880, Hattie came down with diphtheria, flux. And the story is sad. She was not quite 14 years of age. And she wanted to see her classmates before she died, her close friends. And her father propped her up in the window of her bedroom, and she waved goodbye as her friends were down in the yard waving to her. 2 days later, she passed on. 5 days later, her mother passed on. And being diphtheria, they wanted to make sure so no one would suffer from the contagion. Her mother, Maria, my sister-in-law, died that morning, and she was buried that afternoon. I went to see my brother in Derby, and I purchased a flask of whiskey, which I brought back. And you're wondering what this has to do with this story. Well, when I came back, my mother-in-law, Mrs. Town, died of diphtheria. And 2 weeks later, my father-in-law, Mr. Town, died of diphtheria. Then I came down with diphtheria. Well, we had a girl, Nellie. She was engaged to a young brakeman for the railroad. And Nellie helped me, helped me with my wife. And when I became ill, Nellie was making me medicines. Nellie was a teacher, by the way. She went to college for 2 years at Plymouth Normal School, and then she went on for bigger and better things. She became a taxidermist. I suppose if you couldn't teach them, you stuffed them. So Nellie took care of me, and she made medicines for me using the whiskey. Well, it seemed people thought it was all too strange because, first of all, after my wife died, people saw Nellie at the Methodist Church service 2 weeks later wearing, did I say my wife? Not my wife, my sister-in-law, wearing my sister-in-law's coat in church after my sister-in-law was only gone for 2 weeks. Her coat. Now that's brass. And she also had a piece of jewelry. Well, that set the ladies a-talking in the choir loft. Well, after we were all gone, someone made a suggestion that, actually it was I, that when my brother was dying, I went to Lancaster to help him get better, not to die. And he said to me, he says, you know, Ralph, he said, if I didn't know any better, I swear I'm suffering from arsenic poisoning. I swear it's arsenic poisoning. So after they all died, I went to the authorities and made a suggestion. And we exhumed the bodies. And toxology was brand new. And they were studying it at Harvard University. So they exhumed my body, my wife's, Hattie, my mother-in-law, all right, and they sent internal organs to Harvard University where they were put under scrutiny. I keep on saying they sent my body parts. I was here, Frank's body parts, excuse me, all right. They found that Frank was poisoned. They found that Maria was poisoned. They found that my brother's mother-in-law was poisoned, and my brother's father-in-law was poisoned, all with arsenic. And what does a taxidermist use? Arsenic. Well, the suspicion went to Nellie. Nellie was never convicted. A grand jury was called, and there wasn't enough evidence. And to this day, Nellie roams free. Maybe.
What was her motive?
Well, she ended up in my brother's will. She received a vast sum of money, $500 and some secondhand furniture, and a coat. And I guess that Nellie needed a coat bad enough, he had to kill someone. So, there's this story of Ralph Bugbee, my family, and Doxy. Thank you so much for coming by and visiting.
Does Doxy work? Well, good afternoon.
Excuse me, let's try this again. Good afternoon. Thank you. You know, when a man who's 158 years old says good afternoon, you say good afternoon. My name is Eli Wallace. Now you may look at me and say, Eli, why are you standing at the gravestone of Mr. Hodgson? Well, that's because my gravestone is way up there where it says Wallace. And we didn't want you fine folks to have to walk all the way up there. We were afraid some of you it might tax the heart. And to be honest with you, we have no more room left. So we're done. So I am truly Eli Wallace. I was born September 26, 1855 in the town of Bethlehem. My father was Luther Wallace. He lived in Bethlehem. My mother was from Dalton. Her name, Sally Hurlbert. And we had a fine life together. My parents taught me the basics. Hard work, the value of $1, and the value of charity. And those values stuck with me throughout my life. But when I turned 29 years old in 1884, I decided, time to strike out on your own, Eli. And I moved all the way to the town of Littleton. Now you have to remember, in those days, the town of Littleton was the hub of the financial district. So I said to myself, Eli, what business would go well with a financial district? Banking? We have a lot of banks already. I decided to go into the printing business. I opened a print shop and a stationery store. I also had another reason for coming into Littleton and purchasing my own house. Her name was Myra. Myra Burt. We married on October 28, 1885. Her father was Clark Colby Burt. Myra was the light of my life. When that woman would laugh, it could warm your heart on the coldest winter day. She was beautiful, charming, and smart. And together, we ran the printing business and the stationery store. In the summertime, Myra loved to garden. Oh, her flowers were beautiful. Not as beautiful as she was, but they were beautiful indeed. And we loved nature. As the years went on, we realized we couldn't have any children. And that saddened Myra a bit, so I decided to buy her 2 Morgan horses. Their names? Molly and Maud. And we would hitch up Molly and Maud, and we would go out into the countryside. We were a familiar sight throughout town. Everyone would always say, oh, there goes Eli and Myra. We would go off into the country. We'd enjoy all that nature had to offer. The North Country still offers all that. It was an enjoyable time. Everyone loved Myra. Then, May 23rd, 1920. Saddest day of my life. My beloved Myra dies. Cancer. I was thankful the Lord took her quickly, but He left a hole in my heart that would last forever. I grieved terribly. I couldn't continue with the business. I sold the stationery business, I took the printing business, and I moved it to my house that was right on Main Street. And I kept on with that business. Very sad. As the years went on, my 2 Morgans, they started to become ill. I couldn't bear to watch them die slowly. I had Doc Hill, our local veterinarian. I pleaded with him, please, put them down. They shouldn't suffer. He knew how much I loved those horses, so he did. And I had them buried. It's called the Horse Cemetery. It's off of Mount Eustis Road. I buried both of them, granite headstones, and I buried them with full gear. Their tack, their blanket, their pails, like the ancient Egyptians. Everything that was meaningful to them, I put in that gravestone. Years went on, still, nothing could take my place. Now I lost the 2 horses I loved in Myra. Now my friend, who owned the Central Market, he knew I was sad. And he said, Eli, I have a horse that pulled my wagon and needs a loving home. Would you give Maggie a home for me? Yes, I will. And I took care of Maggie. And when she died, she went to the horse cemetery too. And you will find 3 headstones there today. Now, as a person, I was told I had a very quiet nature, but as a businessman, you have to have a sense of humor. You also have to be well versed on a variety of subject matters. And I was. I could talk to anybody. But I wasn't a real outgoing person. I didn't join any clubs or lodges. That wasn't for me. I liked staying at home, tending to my business, and tending to my gardens. I also was very watchful of my neighbors. And when hard times fell on any family in town, very quietly and very efficiently, I would learn to help them out. One of the lessons my father taught me. Very logical and very direct. You don't wait, you do it now. April 1st, 1929, I pass away. Lingering cancer again. It was a tough time. Fortunately, this wonderful couple, Mr. and Mrs. Fred Thom, T-H-O-M, a delightful couple. They stayed with me and they took care of me to my last days. In my will, I left 1/3 of my estate to one brother, 1/3 of my estate to my second brother, and 1/3 of my estate and 40 acres of my land to Littleton Hospital. There was a catch. They had to take care of the cemetery, and they were true to their word. In 1979, though, the Historical Society got wind of this and said, we would like to take it over. And they did. And I'm proud to say to this day, the Historical Society takes very good care of my horses, which pleases me to no end. A year after my death, my brothers, in 1930, sold a great amount of my land in Littleton to a wonderful friend of mine, Emilio. And Emilio opened up a fruit and vegetable market. I'm told it was successful. A sharp man he was. He gave it to his son, who in turn gave it to his son. I believe if you go down the street, you'll still see it today. Because Emilio Profito really enjoyed business. And his son and his grandson, Frank, still run a successful business today. If you go on something, now, I never heard of this, but I'm told that there's something called eBay. Don't know what that is, but if you get on it, you can actually find one of the postcards that I created. And it's called A Bird's Eye View of Littleton. And it's a beautiful postcard. I had several of some of the factories and everything. So there I was. I died. and I was buried. Do you know that my entire funeral came to a total of $383? I was frugal to the end. So that, my friends, is my story. I loved the town of Littleton. I thank you for visiting. Up there, I don't get many visitors, so it's greatly appreciated. As I said, about my funeral costs and charity, how they go hand in hand. As you leave, please help yourself to some cider, some donuts, and if you have not been so generous to make a contribution to this Historical Society, we would most greatly appreciate it. If you have any questions, you can ask. If not, enjoy this glorious day the Lord has given us.